Awesome. It's great to be here, Stephen. Thanks a lot for joining me here today. For folks, I'm Romit. I'm an investor at Lightspeed, focused on Web3 investing. Lightspeed is a $7 billion fund, which we have recently raised, investing across multi-stage and across different categories. Been investing in Web3 since 2014, investors of several large outcomes, including Offchain Labs, and it gives me immense joy to host Stephen here today. Stephen, thanks for joining us.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Stephen, maybe to kick off, for those of for those of us watching who may not know about the story, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about how did the idea for Offchain Labs come about?
Absolutely. So I did my PhD in Princeton University together with my two co-founders. Actually, Harry, our CTO, also was a PhD student, and Ed was not a PhD student, but a longtime professor there. And Arbitrum started off as an academic project. It actually started off with before I was even involved in about 2013. And actually, if you go on YouTube and look for the earliest mention of Arbitrum, you'll find the class project in from fall 2014 in Princeton, and Ed was leading that project. And the reason why I find that interesting to mention is because it predates Ethereum's launch even by about 6 months. And we were thinking about scaling smart contracts, or at least Ed was, well before, any smart contract platform was live. But fast forward, I got involved in the project around 2017. We published a paper at Princeton in 2018, and then we went ahead and said, hey, this technology is really, really important, and we believe that scales only going to become more of a problem over time, right? As demand increases, more people want to use the system, more strain goes on the infrastructure. There's more need to build scaling technologies, and importantly, scaling technologies that preserve security and decentralization. Because if we end up scaling by giving up on our core values, you say, hey, why are we even here in the first place? So we went ahead and said, okay, we wrote a great academic paper, and now let's build it into production. And that was August of 2018. So here we are nearly 4 years later, and we've built it into production. And I think our work is still have a ton of work ahead of us, more than we probably could have imagined, but we're really happy with the product we've launched today. We're constantly thinking about how to make it more open to users, more inclusive to more users, more applications, and super excited for the future of Arbitrum.
I'm sure it must be extremely gratifying to see the response that you've been getting today after years and years of work on that. Stephen, of course, we're having this conversation in light of several announcements in the space that happened yesterday from Polygon. For the broader audience today, could you sort of talk a little bit about, at a high level, what is the difference between ZK rollups and optimistic rollups? And how do you sort of really expect this competition to play out from a point of view of developers who are looking to deploy applications while choosing one of these two systems?
Great question. And I'll start with what we have in common. So we're all roll-ups, and that's the common denominator. A roll-up is a way to build what's called a layer 2 chain, or a chain that sits on top of another chain and gets its security from that chain. And in our case, that's Ethereum. Ethereum is the layer 1. But the problem with Ethereum is very secure, very decentralized. It doesn't scale very well on the layer 1. And the way Ethereum scales is by layer 2s. Vitalik Buterin wrote about 2 years ago in a blog post, said ETH2's roadmap is roll-up centric. So roll-up is that word that unites us all. And the question is, how do you build a roll-up? So what is a roll-up? A roll-up basically takes a lot of transactions off-chain. Instead of making Ethereum do all of that work, it proves to Ethereum what happened. So it says, hey, Ethereum, don't worry, I'm going to do all the work, but I really want Ethereum's correctness. I want Ethereum's security. So Ethereum has to give its stamp of approval and say this is correct. And so the rollup says, proves to Ethereum what happened off-chain. And then the question is, where optimistic rollups and ZK rollups differ is how they do that proof. In ZK rollups, they do something called the validity proof. They say, hey, Ethereum, here is a proof of what happened. In optimistic rollups case, we do something called the fraud proof. And the reason it's called an optimistic rollup is actually because in the happy case, in the optimistic case, there's no proof at all. You just say, hey, Ethereum, this is what happened. Only if someone goes ahead and challenges that do we then go ahead and do a fraud proof. And that's sort of the core differentiator between optimistic rollups and ZK rollups in the proving technology. We're all proving, but the question is, how do we prove? In terms of how this plays out and how users choose, the fact is that today, the only live network, the only live true rollup network that's live today, the only fully built out rollup that's general purpose meaning anyone can launch a chain, it's EVM compatible, is Arbitrum. There is no other fully built out rollup today. neither that's general purpose, and it's EVM compatible. Not optimistic. There are other optimistic rollouts, but they haven't built their proofs out yet, and not ZK. And the announcements today, I'm a researcher by heart. I did my PhD in cryptography, actually, so very, very exciting announcements. But there are announcements that are a very, very early stage. It's saying, hey, we're going to launch a test net soon. Another team is saying, hey, we have a pre-alpha of a ZK EVM. The problem with the ZK EVM, it's a very, very intractable problem. And I think we're very, very far away from production of that system, of those systems. But exciting progress has been made by these teams. But again, it's still pre-test net, very, very early progress. And the thing that I'd watch is, remember I said Arbitrum is an optimistic system. It doesn't have to do those proofs. The really, really expensive thing in ZK rollups is actually those proofs. Saying, hey, here's a proof, it's very, very expensive to compute. And there is no ZK rollup that actually, general purpose ZK rollup that does those proofs today for the EVM. So we really don't have no benchmarks of what they cost. But we don't have to do that. And our system runs much, much cheaper, much more cheaply. And I think that's going to be a core differentiator, and also the one of compatibility. Today with Arbitrum Nitro on DevNet and soon on mainnet, we're actually using Geth directly. We are as close and as compatible to Ethereum as possible. And that means if you're an Ethereum developer, you have code written already, or you have knowledge that you built, you have tooling that you like to use, it will all work directly on Arbitrum. And the level of compatibility with ZK rollups, I don't think will ever be that close, because it's a fundamentally different computing paradigm, and they're trying to sort of retrofit it. Again, very, very exciting technologies, but there is definitely some pressure, as you see, for these teams. I don't think it's a coincidence that there were 3 teams on the same day that announced, hey, we're the first ZK EVM. There's a lot of pressure to go first and show that we have something. But if you take a step back, while the developments are very, very exciting, they're a ways away from mainnet. And I think the costs of Arbitrum will always be significantly cheaper, even if and when they reach mainnet, as will the compatibility be much, much better for optimistic rollups. So long-term, I'm bullish for Arbitrum today, as I am bullish for Arbitrum in the long term. And the last thing I'll say is, we're launching Arbitrum Nitro soon on mainnet. And that's a massive development. A year after we open our mainnet, we're having a massive new development. So we're not saying, okay, we're done, here we are. We're constantly saying, how do we do better? And the guarantee that I'll give everyone here today is we will always be offering the best scaling technology today. It's undisputed that the best production-ready scaling technology today is Arbitrum's flavor of optimistic rollup, is Arbitrum's interactive fraud proofs, which we have running today. And if you compare us to any other team today, including ZK teams, that's clear. And in the future, it's not going to be, there's a fallacy people sometimes do, which they like to compare the future eventual vision of the ZK teams with where Arbitrum is today, right? But you have to do one or the other. You compare us today for them today, and clearly, I think Arbitrum is far ahead. And compare us to the future to them in the future. And we don't know exactly what their progress will be in the future. We don't know exactly what our progress will be in the future. But we're not stopping, and we're continually asking ourselves, how do we do better? And if it turns out that incorporating at some point ZK components in Arbitrum makes sense, we'll absolutely do that. At this point, though, that technology is not ready, and we're confident the technology we have is the best today. But the researcher in me and the community, I'm very, very excited about the progress of these teams, and I will be continuing to watch that because I think it's very, very important and exciting progress.
That's a very interesting point, Stephen. I think when somebody thinks of Arbitrum, it is optimistic rollups that come to mind. And I think your point is well taken, that is the production ready technology today, but you're not ruling out ZKs. If in the future it pans out in a way that it makes sense for you to incorporate it, that is something you'd look at. So I think that's an important point, and thanks for articulating that. Coming specifically to the current state of optimistic, L2s, there's obviously one large competitor in the space. In some sense, the battle for L2s is about getting the mindshare of developers themselves. Maybe, if you had to put yourself in the minds of developers today, how would you think that they would make the choice between you and the other competitors who are out in the optimistic space?
Yeah, I think I touched on this earlier. We're a tech first team. And, a year ago, I might have answered this question differently. Actually, I spoke at this conference a year ago, and we can go back and look. A year ago, there were some debates on how to build an optimistic rollup. Arbitrum was always saying interactive fraud proofs, and other teams like Optimism that you alluded to was saying single shot fraud proofs. It turned out that their approach didn't work, and now there's full consensus in the optimistic rollup team that Arbitrum's approach of interactive fraud proofs is the correct one. The thing is, we've been building this for years, and we actually have our technology built out, whereas no other team has actually built out these interactive fraud proofs yet, right? They're working on it, they're implementing it. And, we are also still in a beta phase. We have controls and we have whitelisting over operators that are running these, but our technology is fully built out. And that's true both for the Nitro stack that we're introducing and the current stack, fully built out technology. And and that's sort of the key piece of being a roll-up is actually having those pieces built out. And I think that's a very important differentiator. The fact that we have mature tech that's running in production and is actually built out, and others are, have come around to our design and are working to build that, but are decidedly, not exactly where we are today. And, it's nice to have competition. I think we all make ourselves better when you have competition. You strive to be the best. But I think from a technical standpoint, we are definitely the most advanced, and we are the only general purpose rollup, optimistic word ZK, that actually has the full system built out, albeit in beta, but fully code complete and built out. And I think that's, something that's very, very important. And the other thing I'll focus on is just, the ecosystem. We're also the only major rollup that hasn't announced, we haven't done any sort of incentives, the only on our platform, but we still have leading market share on our platform. And the reason I believe is because, the technology is really what leads here, is what leads and what's critically important. And that's why we're here in the first place, right? We're here because we want decentralized technology that's secure, that has security of Ethereum. And I think, users and developers alike can appreciate that. And the ecosystem, a lot of time developers want to build where other developers are, and the ecosystem and the network effect is strong. And Arbitrum has, I think, by far the strongest ecosystem from TVL standpoint, from a deployed number of apps standpoint, from infrastructure standpoint. And that's very, very important, I think, when you consider you want to be in a healthy ecosystem with liquidity, et cetera. So I would say, again, I wish all the teams in the space well. I really, truly do. But I think in terms of rollups, again, we are the only rollup today that's actually fully code complete, and we have a dominant ecosystem today. And, we're continuing to do what we can to attract people in a very sustainable, with a very sustainable long-term vision. We'll give all sorts of, we welcome, we're open, we're fair to all. And, we welcome everyone to build our ecosystem. And anyone out there that's wants to get in touch, you can definitely, DM me or anyone in our team. We're always happy to discuss that as well.
That's a great pitch, Stephen. And I think I'd also point out, you mentioned it was interesting that, all of this adoption has been without incentives. And that, I think, in turn just generates a fair amount of chatter on Twitter. But, I want to move away from that and just understand your vision for Arbitrum itself. You announced Nova about, I think, a week ago. And that seems to be a little bit more social and gaming focused, while Arbitrum One is NFT and DeFi focused. Just talk to us through how you're thinking about, these different pieces inside the Arbitrum ecosystem, and how do you think about scaling Arbitrum itself?
It's a great question. And the real answer is, we want to make sure that we have technology that's inclusive to all and that makes sense for every application. And I think for DeFi and for NFTs, particularly NFTs of high value, the roll-up solution makes a lot of sense, and it works, right? So, if transaction fees are 50 cents for most DeFi protocols, even for retail level trading, that's very accessible for at least for a lot of people. Obviously, the lower you go, the more accessible it is, and the lower trade amounts, et cetera, you can support. But for many users, and it's very, very accessible. And we think it's important. We're also lowering those fees over time, even in the roll-up. Arbitrum Nitro will lower our fees, and we'll continue to adopt new measures. We're launching new compression as part of Nitro. Basic compression, the majority of our fees in the roll-up is passed through to layer one, the fees that we pay to Ethereum. So the more we compress the data we put in Ethereum, the lower that we can make our fees, and we're launching more advanced compression. And we'll continue, to my point before, we'll continue to make progress there to get fees lower and lower. But I think for financial applications, that's the solution that makes sense. But then there are games and social applications that are very, very high volume. And they might say, hey, I really need a high security solution, but if it costs me, even 50 cents to play my game and, to interact in the game. That's expensive, right? A game is supposed to be fun. And if every time you click a button in the game, your wallet's being drained, might not be so much fun. So, and it's a very pragmatic point. And they say, but often they'll say, but I want a solution that's more secure than a sidechain. I want a solution that's Ethereum based and more secure than a layer one. So we went to the drawing board and said, hey, what can we offer these teams, right? These teams want a more secure solution. Is there anything we can do? And that's where the AnyTrust technology really came to light as a really good contender. The Arbitrum Nova chain is our chain built on the AnyTrust technology. And this is a way where we could say, hey, we can give you a really secure chain and really, with much better security than a sidechain. Not quite a roll-up, but much better security than a sidechain, but with fees that are competitive or that are much lower than the roll-up. And I think that's, an important design space for people. One of the things you have to realize is different teams, different users, different applications have different needs. And there's, there may not be a one size fits all for everyone. And that's what we're trying to get at, which is, there was a need in the market, which is there are these teams that want a higher security chain, but the roll-ups were sort of just not working for them, at least in their current iteration. And, we said, can we fill that need? And I think, Arbitrum Nova is a really good solution to that. And so the question then is, so how do we scale Arbitrum? I think with these two chains, continuing to build the DeFi ecosystem, build the NFT ecosystem, build the social and gaming ecosystem are really critical to us and important. And we have a lot of initiatives to try to continue to educate and grow the ecosystem. And I'm excited for those.
Thanks, Stephen, for that overview. And yeah, certainly does resonate with a lot of things that I hear from game developers themselves and the things that they look for. Maybe I want to turn the focus back on 2021, which was in some sense was a path-breaking year for the entire industry. And for me also in some sense, it was a year of block space. All L1s came to the forefront. L2s today are surely dominating the narrative. And the other thing that's playing out today that I see more and more of is applications sort of rolling out their own chains to, maybe lend more utility to their, the tokens that they roll out. Let's say if I have to ask you to forecast about 18 months from now, how do you see developers making the choice between alt L1s with their high throughput, fast settlement times, L2s that are helping, Ethereum scale, such as Arbitrum, and they're having their own app chains, right? Like what matters to them, and how do you think niches emerge between, I think, three very compelling options?
It's it's a great question. And I think the core thing to focus here is really Ethereum. Ethereum, it's not Arbitrum I want to focus on. It's Ethereum, and the value of Ethereum is something that's really great, and the community of Ethereum is probably just as important as the technology. Ethereum has great technology and also a great community, and so there's a ton of, and if you look at the innovation in the space, the vast majority of innovation happens on Ethereum. There are definitely other chains, and some of them have pockets of the ecosystem, like particular app types might be more inclined to go to a different chain. But if you look at just across the ecosystem where the vast majority of innovation is happening, it's absolutely Ethereum. And there's a reason for that. It's because the values of the space, the decentralization, security that Ethereum optimizes for, ultimately, that's why we're here. That's why people come here. And, if you're centralizing and sort of trying to replace one set of centralized actors with another set, de facto, right? If you have a decentralized chain, but in fact, it decentralizes because of the requirements to participate. I think that's not ideal for a lot of people. And there may be some that care less and more, but a lot of, at least the people that come here from a principled and values perspective, overwhelmingly choose Ethereum. And again, there's the technology, and there's also the community, the innovation, the mind share. And the technology point is, there's the EVM, and even though the EVM is not perfect, there's so much code and knowledge, and that's just built up. And that's if you have an app, it probably already exists in Solidity today. And so, and if you're hiring a developer, you'll have a better chance hiring a Solidity developer than some other language, et cetera, which is why obviously there's a move for other chains to adopt the EVM, but that just goes to show how entrenched Ethereum is in the ecosystem. And that's something which I think needs to be, is sort of the foundation here. And then we say, so how will users make that choice? I think that there's a real desire for users to be in the Ethereum ecosystem. I speak with teams all day long, and I don't think I've ever heard someone say, I don't want to be in Ethereum. Usually people will say either I want to be in Ethereum or I can't be on Ethereum, right? Ethereum's not working for me today. That's something which I hear relatively often, but it's never like, hey, from a values perspective, I don't want to be on Ethereum. The only time I really see anti-Ethereum is when, particularly in the smart contract space, when people have financial incentives involved. Maybe they're invested in another project. But I think most applications that are coming to it want to be on Ethereum, and either they launch on Ethereum or they say I can't launch on Ethereum. And that's what we're doing at Arbitrum. We're trying to make Ethereum more accessible to people. So we don't want people to say, I want to be an Ethereum, but I have to go elsewhere, right? We want people to say, no, I want to be an Ethereum. And oh, Arbitrum is that layer, is the retail layer for Ethereum. I can be on Ethereum now via Arbitrum. And that's what we're trying to do for people. So Arbitrum makes Ethereum more accessible. So I personally am very, very long-term believer in the dominance of Ethereum. And I think once we have, and we have today, but once solutions like Arbitrum become more prominent and get more mainstream adoption, that's just going to fuel more and more adoption to Ethereum. Because like I said, usually it's when I speak to teams, and obviously there are teams that I don't speak to, but the majority of teams that I speak to that aren't building Ethereum say, we looked at Ethereum, but it didn't work for us for this reason. And we're trying to solve all those problems from a UX perspective. Arbitrum gives you fast confirmation. So you press a button, you get a response. Arbitrum will lower your fees immensely. And we have work to be done. How do we lower those fees more? But the question always is, how do we lower those fees more without sacrificing security and the decentralization of Ethereum? So when I look forward to the next year, to the next 18 months, I think that's going to be the defining characteristic, the accessibility of Ethereum, the inclusiveness of Ethereum, and that's going to be really enabled by layer twos. And, there's a lot of decision points you can make in Ethereum. For example, you can choose to launch an Arbitrum Nova. If you're a game, you can choose to launch an Arbitrum rollup. And actually, some projects, there are ZK projects, for example, that today launch app-specific chains for projects, and you can do app-specific rollups and optimistic rollups as well. Some projects may decide to be on Ethereum via an application-specific rollup too. That's what the beauty of Ethereum. There's going to be, I think, lots of different options, many of them provided by us at Offchain Labs and Arbitrum, many different options to be on Ethereum. And the idea is, no matter who you are, no matter what type of project you are, with the help of L2s like Arbitrum, Ethereum can work for you, and there will be a way for you to build your product on Ethereum.
Stephen, thanks for that answer. I think we have 5 more minutes left. Maybe I want to squeeze in a couple of questions and still make sure that we're on time. Since you mentioned about Ethereum and sort of how L2s play in that ecosystem, I do want to ask about the argument around the economics and cannibalization that happens with Ethereum. You do mention that most of the fees that you earn in Arbitrum, you do pass to Ethereum, but it isn't on Arbitrum that's helping scale that solution. How do you think of resolving this kind of an issue that exists, and what does that say about the long-term economic sustainability of L2s with Ethereum?
Yeah, so is on the cannibalization point is the idea that we're taking the volume from Ethereum, and maybe one day we will be Ethereum aligned.
For example, like if developers are choosing you, could Arbitrum potentially become its own L1 one day, which allows you to capture more of the value that you're generating versus necessarily passing that on to Ethereum?
Yeah, so the answer is, particularly in our own beta, but particularly once we get out of beta, the chain that we launched from Ethereum will never jump from Ethereum, right? So could Offchain Labs as a company, could we decide tomorrow, hey, we pick Solana, could that happen tomorrow? I don't think it will, but sure, it could happen. What that would mean is we do a deployment on Solana, right? Particularly, once we're out of beta, rollup chains sort of just work and are built on Ethereum. It would be, we wouldn't go, there wouldn't be a way, once the ownership controls are released, there wouldn't be a way to sort of change that. So I don't think users have to, and that's the core thing that's important to realize is we're not building a brand just on generic Arbitrum technology. We're building a brand on Arbitrum technology on Ethereum. And the interesting thing is, I'm not tied to the hip to Ethereum at all, right? Every day we awake anew, and the reason we decide to make the Ethereum experience better is because we believe in Ethereum, and Ethereum, we constantly and continuously believe in Ethereum. So the idea is users can be confident that the Ethereum solution won't go anywhere. Is it possible in another, in a year from now, I'll change my mind and we'll say we should start building on a different L1 also? I don't think will happen, but of course it's possible, but that would be a different deployment of this technology. The ecosystem that exists today would have to remain on Ethereum. So I think that that's something which is important to note, but fundamentally, we do believe in Ethereum. We continue to believe in Ethereum, and I don't see that changing, anytime soon.
Thanks for the answer, Stephen. And maybe the final one, I think every bull and bear market teaches the ecosystem something. I'm curious, what has been your biggest learning in the last bull market, the last cycle that we've seen that will withstand for years to come?
I think it's the importance of realizing that it's very easy to get caught up in the moment and in the cycle. And you always think in the moment that everything is an emergency. Like, oh my gosh, I need to respond to this right now. I need to make this exact deadline. I need to rush things out, the door. But actually building sustainable technology is, to me, the most important thing that will last, right? And that's why we're here, during the bear market, and we'll be here again during the bull market, because fundamentally, we believe in what we're building. We're building technology first. And I think it's, the focus to realize that the markets are nice, but trying to turn off from the markets and say, why are we here? We're here to build technology. And it's important to take the time to build it right, to actually, in our case, make sure the system, is fully code complete before we launch it. And that's an important, principle for us. So, the learning that I had would be, it's very easy to get caught up in the markets and feel pressure on those, but really, we're doing something that's so important. We're building infrastructure that I personally believe will be fundamental for generations. So it's important to take the time to build it right. Market will go up, market will go down. Cycles will happen again. It's hard to see it when the market's up. You think you're here forever, but it'll go up and it'll go down. But the true builders that are building for values, I think will continue to be here throughout those markets. Build what you believe, your values, and don't get caught up in the short-term market pressures is what I would say.
That's an excellent point, Stephen, and resonates very closely with what we tell our portfolio founders as well. Don't look at the daily prices, focus on the technology, build for the long term, and this ecosystem is here to stay. Thank you for that inspirational message. It's been an absolute pleasure hosting you and learning more about Arbitrum from you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really, really great conversation.
All right. Thank you, everyone.